Part 1 moved quickly for Ethan Hayes, a man in his mid-30s who often felt older than he was. Not because of age, but because of the quiet exhaustion that settles on people who have spent too long wanting a life that never seems to come together. He stood on a weathered pier along Lake Michigan after another long day that had left him feeling half full and half lost. Staring at the gray-blue water as if it might answer questions he was too tired to voice. Ethan wasn't the kind of man who wanted fame or fortune. What he wanted felt much simpler, yet somehow harder to find. He wanted 4 things he believed every human deserved, but not everyone received: peace, purpose, love, and a place that felt like home. Those 4 once shaped his thoughts more than he liked to admit. And on that chilly evening, he felt the weight of all of them pressing against his ribs. His job at a logistics firm paid the bills but never lit anything inside him. His small apartment had everything he needed but never felt warm. His days were predictable, his nights quiet, his heart careful. He looked like someone who had life mostly figured out. But inside he knew he was searching for something he couldn't name aloud. The truth was that he feared wanting too much, feared being disappointed again, feared believing life could still surprise him. Yet even with that fear, a tiny part of him still imagined something more waiting for him beyond the routine. While standing on the pier, he found himself remembering the last time he felt truly at ease. And he couldn't come up with a single moment from the past few years. He wasn't unhappy, but he wasn't living fully either. He had friends, but didn't feel fully known. He had work, but not passion. He had space, but not belonging. The 4 things he wanted floated around his life, like shadows of a dream he once had when he was younger, braver and far more hopeful. He tried to push these thoughts aside, keeping his eyes fixed on the restless water. But the wind seemed to whisper back the truth he avoided. He wasn't asking for luxury, he was asking for meaning. It was strange to feel both grateful and empty at the same time. But Ethan lived in that middle ground every day. He had learned to stay quiet about it because he didn't want to sound dramatic or ungrateful. Still, the ache inside him remained gentle but constant. The kind that reminded him something was missing even when everything looked fine on the surface. Life in Chicago moved fast, but Ethan moved through it slowly. Not because he wanted to, but because he didn't know where to go next. He kept waiting for a sign, a moment, something that would shift his path. What he didn't know that evening was that change was already making its way toward him, quiet and unannounced. Ethan had no idea that he was standing on the edge of a chapter that would alter everything. He thought he knew about longing and fulfillment. He didn't know that someone was about to walk into his life who carried her own fears, her own hopes, her own unanswered questions, and that she would become the beginning of all 4 things he had whispered into the lake for years. He had no clue that the life he thought was too small was about to grow in ways he had only imagined, in moments of rare honesty. As the sky deepened into shades of gold and indigo, Ethan finally turned away from the water. Unaware that this quiet evening marked the end of his old rhythm. He didn't know that soon he would be tested, softened, lifted, and changed by a connection he never saw coming. When he walked back toward the city lights, hands tucked in his coat pockets, heart heavy but still beating with stubborn hope, he felt something unusually light in his chest, as if the wind had placed a promise there. And though he wouldn't realize it until much later, this was the last day he would ever feel alone in the way he felt on that pier part. 2 began the moment Grace Donovan walked into Ethan Hayes' life, carrying her camera bag and a quiet determination that immediately drew his attention. She had arrived in Chicago from Maine, chasing a photography project and a fresh start. Though neither she nor Ethan realized how much their paths were about to intertwine, their first encounter was at the Community Arts Center, where Ethan volunteered on weekends, helping organize exhibits and manage the space. Grace moved with a calm energy, but her eyes hinted at layers of thought and emotion, a depth that made Ethan's chest tighten in a way he hadn't felt in years. He noticed how she studied every photograph like she was trying to uncover a secret hidden in the frame, how her hands adjusted the lighting with care, how she smiled at strangers with a warmth that felt effortless. At first, their conversations were polite, professional, casual, but gradually they began to share small stories about their lives, laughing quietly over coffee breaks, exchanging observations about the city. And speaking of dreams, they both kept close to their chests. Ethan discovered that Grace was fearless in pursuing what mattered to her, even if it scared her. And he realized he had admired people like her from a distance for years, but had never dared to approach them. As the days passed, he began to notice subtle details: the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when nervous, the way she lingered over a photograph as if it might tell her something she hadn't yet understood, the way her voice softened when she spoke about the people she cared about back home. In her presence, Ethan began to feel a peace he had only imagined on lonely nights, a sense of calm that filled the spaces he had long considered empty. Grace, too, found herself inspired by Ethan's quiet patience and steady presence, his ability to listen without judgment and to offer encouragement without pressure. It wasn't long before their connection deepened without them even realizing it, growing in small gestures and shared moments, a shared glance while setting up an exhibit, laughter over spilled coffee, lingering silences that didn't feel awkward but full of unspoken understanding. One evening, after the center closed and the streets were quiet with the soft hum of city lights, Ethan and Grace walked outside together, the wind carrying the faint scent of autumn leaves. They lingered near the edge of the center, hands brushing accidentally, but the touch sent a spark neither could ignore. For a moment, time seemed to pause as they looked at each other, a connection unspoken but undeniable. Grace, sensing the shift in the air, asked softly, "What are you looking for, Ethan?" And he felt caught off guard, unable to articulate the longing that had driven him for years. He wanted to tell her everything: how he longed for peace, purpose, love, and home, but the words got caught in his throat, leaving only a nervous smile and silence. Before he could respond, her phone buzzed insistently, breaking the delicate tension. She glanced at the screen, her expression flickering with concern. And in a moment, she was gone, retreating into the night with a sense of urgency Ethan couldn't understand. That sudden absence left him standing alone on the sidewalk, the lingering warmth of their shared moment fading into the cool night air. Despite the abrupt ending, something inside him had shifted. The calm he felt in her presence had left a trace, a faint hope that maybe, just maybe, he had found someone who could give him the peace he had longed for. Days turned into a blur of work and routine, but the memory of Grace and the unspoken connection lingered in his mind. Every time he walked past the center or saw a photograph that reminded him of her, his chest tightened with anticipation, a quiet longing that refused to fade. He realized that meeting her had awakened feelings he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. And though the uncertainty scared him, it also made life feel alive again. He didn't know where she had gone or how long she would stay away, but he couldn't ignore the pull toward her, the sense that this unexpected presence in his life was meant to teach him something about hope, courage, and desire. Ethan found himself replaying every interaction in his mind, analyzing her words, her gestures, the way she looked at him, and in those reflections, he began to recognize the first hints of something he had longed for: quietly connection. Grace's sudden disappearance left him with questions, curiosity, and a new kind of ache, a combination of worry and anticipation that filled him with both dread and excitement. He realized that, for the first time in years, he was not just living day to day, he was waiting for something, someone, and that wait itself had begun to change him, softening his heart and opening it to possibilities he had thought were long gone. That night, as he sat by his small apartment window looking at the city lights, he felt a strange mixture of hope and fear, a feeling that life was about to shift dramatically, and that the arrival of Grace Donovan had set him on a path where peace and purpose might finally meet love and home. If only he could reach out and take it. Part 3 opened with the quiet tension of absence. As days and weeks stretched between Ethan and Grace, each moment filled with unanswered questions and a growing ache in the chest, Ethan tried to convince himself he was fine. But every corner of the city reminded him of her way she laughed, the careful way she studied everything, the warmth she carried without even knowing it. He would replay their last evening together at the art center. The brush of her hand, the sudden pull of urgency that took her away. And he felt the emptiness settle deeper each time. Emails and messages were sparse, her responses polite but distant. And every pause in her words left a gnawing worry in his chest. When Grace finally returned, she looked different. Not just older in experience, but heavier with responsibility. She confessed quietly over coffee that her father's illness had called her back to Maine. And she had stayed longer than planned, tending to him and the household she had left behind. Ethan listened, absorbing her words with a mixture of relief and frustration. Understanding the demands of family, yet feeling the sting of distance. The weeks of separation had tested the fragile beginnings they had formed, but it had also shown Ethan how much he cared. How deeply he longed for her presence in ways that went beyond fleeting attraction. Grace's eyes carried both warmth and uncertainty, and in that quiet cafe, Ethan realized that life had forced them to face more than just longing. It had made them confront choices, fears, and the reality that connection is fragile and must be nurtured. She admitted her own fears, how she didn't know if staying in Chicago would make sense, how she felt torn between responsibility and her own dreams. And Ethan felt the weight of those words pressing on his heart, yet also the undeniable pull that neither distance nor circumstance could break. In the silence between them, he noticed the trembling of her hand as it brushed against his across the table. A subtle plea for reassurance, a quiet way of asking him not to give up. He wanted to speak the words that had formed in his chest for weeks, to tell her she didn't have to face the world alone, to promise her that whatever came, they could navigate it together, but he held back, unsure if he had the right or the timing to say them. Instead, he offered a quiet hope, a soft promise carried in his voice. "Then let me hope for both of us." That simple phrase carried more than he realized, a bridge between two hearts, unsure of how to meet. Grace's eyes lingered on him longer than she expected, her breath catching as if she wanted to say more but didn't. And the space between them filled with unspoken words and possibilities. Despite the distance, Ethan felt a shift inside himself, a quiet certainty that connection, once formed, cannot easily be undone. Yet life's trials weren't finished with them. Grace soon received another urgent call, a new responsibility that forced her to make choices neither of them were prepared for. And once again, she was pulled away, leaving Ethan with that familiar ache and a flicker of hope that refused to die. He found himself replaying every shared glance, every laugh, every silence that had felt like understanding. And he realized that even absence could not erase the bond forming between them. Ethan began to understand that love and hope are not always comfortable, that longing can hurt, but it can also teach, and that the heart is willing to risk discomfort if it sees truth in another person. He walked through the city streets with thoughts spinning, imagining how different life could be if she stayed, if they could be together without interruption, and yet he held no resentment, only the kind of quiet yearning that leaves space for miracles. Every evening, he revisited the art center in memory, feeling her presence in the way sunlight hit the old wooden floors, in the scent of paint and paper, in the quiet moments of reflection that once passed unnoticed. Each thought, each memory deepened his awareness of what he wanted and who he wanted it with. And even as life tested their patience, he understood that real connection isn't about ease, about persistence, faith, and willingness to wait for the right moment. That night, sitting by his window, city lights glowing softly around him, Ethan imagined Grace's return, replaying scenarios where they might reunite and speak the words left unspoken. He realized that this heartbreak, this tension, was not an end, but a preparation, a way for their hearts to recognize the strength of the bond forming quietly between them. He felt an ache that was painful yet beautiful, a mix of hope and fear, knowing that the next encounter could change everything. As he drifted into restless sleep, he dreamed of the day Grace would walk back into his life fully, not as a fleeting presence, but as someone ready to meet the longing in his heart with her own. And he understood for the first time that sometimes distance is necessary to show the depth of what truly matters. The days ahead were uncertain, but Ethan held on to the quiet hope that their story wasn't over, that the four things he had yearned, for peace, purpose, love, and home might still converge in a way he never thought possible. And that Grace's return would be the key to a future he'd only dared to imagine in the softest corners of his heart. Part 4 began with the slow unraveling of distance. The weeks and months that had stretched between Ethan and Grace testing both patience and heart, yet also proving the strength of what had quietly grown between them. Grace had moved back to Maine to care for her father, and the long distance weighed on both of them, filling hours with uncertainty, phone calls that often ended too soon, and messages that sometimes went unanswered because life demanded attention elsewhere. Despite the gap, Ethan held on to hope, replaying memories of shared laughter, the soft brush of hands, and the quiet understanding they had discovered in one another. He poured himself into his routines, yet nothing filled the spaces Grace had left behind. Her absence was palpable in the city streets, in the empty corners of the art center. In the evenings, that stretched longer than usual. But hope has a way of persisting quietly, and Ethan found himself planning, imagining, believing that the bond they had created could survive the tests of time and distance. When Grace finally returned to Chicago, the city itself seemed to embrace her arrival. The streets brighter somehow, the autumn leaves whispering against the wind like a welcome. Their reunion was neither loud nor dramatic. It was a gentle moment in which the world seemed to pause. And Ethan felt a calm rush of relief and joy he hadn't realized he had been holding his breath for. Grace smiled, weary, yet strong, her eyes reflecting months of challenges and reflection, and in that instant, he understood the depth of their connection, how absence had sharpened their awareness of what truly mattered. They spent days walking the city together, sharing coffee at quiet cafes, wandering through galleries, and talking late into the night about everything they had experienced, every challenge and every small victory. Ethan noticed the subtle changes in her, the way she had grown more confident, the way her laughter carried a new warmth, the way she spoke with honesty about fears she had held close during the long separation. Grace, in turn, noticed Ethan's patience, his steady presence, the way he had quietly carried hope for both of them without ever pressuring her. And she realized that his calm determination was exactly what she had needed while navigating her own uncertainties. The city itself became their quiet witness, the lights of the streets reflecting in their eyes as they discovered that the bond formed in moments of shared vulnerability had only strengthened with time. Ethan found peace in her presence, a calm he hadn't known he could feel so profoundly. A quiet certainty that the longing he had carried for years was finally met. Grace discovered purpose again in her work and in her presence beside him, knowing that her dreams and responsibilities could coexist with the love she had found in Ethan. One afternoon, walking along the pier where he had first realized the depth of his own yearning, Ethan felt an overwhelming sense of completion as Grace slipped her hand into his, letting it rest comfortably, naturally. It was a simple gesture, but in that simplicity, he felt the fulfillment of everything he had silently wished for: peace, purpose, love, and a sense of home. There was no dramatic declaration, no frantic rush. Instead, life allowed them the gentle certainty that their hearts had found the right place, that the longing and waiting had brought them exactly where they needed to be. That evening, as the lake reflected the colors of a setting sun, Ethan and Grace sat together in quiet contentment, the city lights flickering in the distance and the soft sound of water lapping against the pier providing a steady rhythm. They spoke softly, their conversation meandering through memories and future dreams, yet always returning to the unspoken acknowledgement that they had found something rare, something that distance, fear, and time could not erase. Ethan realized that wanting all four things had never been selfish. It had been a deep honesty with himself. And now he had the joy of seeing those desires reflected in reality, intertwined with the presence of someone who matched his heart in both longing and patience. Grace leaned her head on his shoulder as they watched the sun disappear beyond the horizon, And in that moment, everything felt complete. The ache of longing had transformed into the warmth of connection, the uncertainty into quiet confidence, and the waiting into shared life. The city hummed around them, but for Ethan and Grace, the world had narrowed.